I'm immediately smirking too. Shit.
Oh
So
dear.
who's the host? Who gets to say hi?
There's no host. It's like a radio show. This is an unusual format for both of us.
Yeah, bring it on. Um, do you want to introduce everyone to like what we're planning on doing?
Okay. So we have yet to name this podcast.
So
Much
you
like
can
my
ask the
baby.
question. You can ask the question that we just asked offline to kick us
Yeah.
off there. That's how kind
Yeah,
of
like
early and unformed this is.
because we're both expecting kids and pretty much at a similar time. I don't know if you've already got a baby name, but we don't. And maybe that's the way this podcast is going to work for today. Maybe it doesn't have a name. I don't know. But the format of the show is Jake and I are going to be mostly having conversations between the two of us. Each of us will bring three topics to the table. Probably Bitcoin related, but we're open to talking about all sorts of things. This is an opportunity to, I guess, get to know Jake and I a little bit, but also we're going to try and touch on some of the more topical things, some philosophical things, some practical things, and inevitably we'll end up speaking about our experience working together at Bitcoin Mentor Australia. And I think that's something that I'm also very excited to talk about. So perhaps not today. We only just launched literally 3 days ago or 2 days ago, so we don't have any real life war stories or tales to share, but I'm sure that'll come to light in due course. What do you think?
Well, one of the working titles for the podcast has been Bitcoin Unfiltered. And I mean, it says it in the title. It's going to be really hard for us not to talk about Bitcoin all the time. But Bitcoin has lots of different facets. So maybe that's not a bad thing. And I really like that phrase that Bitcoin doesn't change, but you change. So Bitcoin changes you. And it changes everything in terms of your approach to health, your approach to business, to investing. And that's a very profound shift that I don't think has really been studied yet. And if Bitcoin is what we believe it is, and if Bitcoiners are a representation of the future, then the way that it's helping us to evolve today is a fascinating subject. And I hope that that's what will come through. And what we want it to be is unfiltered. I don't want to have to hold back on how I actually think and how I actually feel. And if I'm pissed off about something, I'm going to say I'm pissed off about it. And some people are going to listen. They're going to be like, these guys are absolute dickheads. And that's totally fine because those people aren't our audience. And so they can fuck right off, basically. And I don't know where it's going to take us. So we'll see. As you can tell, I'm not going to be upset if someone swears from time to time to make a point. And to your original thing, we don't really know where it's going to go. But in that vast expanse of creative possibility will come something very cool. And the idea is that it's just every week, without any questions whatsoever, we just jump online and we have a conversation about what comes up. So let me lead that in a sense. And maybe it's quite fun if you can mention the three things you want to talk about, and then we can decide which one we want to tackle first. And maybe we'll get through all six, or maybe we'll get through just like none, like just one, maybe. I don't know. So we'll see.
Okay, cool. Do you want to run through yours or should I run through
Yeah,
mine? What do you?
I'll just shoot it off, and
Yeah,
two of
go
them
for
are
it.
combined. But today I came across the Australian Bureau of Statistics website, and I was researching how much the consumer price index has actually changed. And believe it or not, the CPI consisted of weights from 1948, and they were updated in 1952, then in 1956, 1960, 63, 68, 73, 74, 76, 82, 87, 92, 98, 2000, 2005, 2011, 2017, and from 2018 onwards, the CPI weights will be updated annually.
Okay.
What?
So they decide what goes into the basket each year.
So the major metric that is used to define the return on capital employed for most funds under management is changed every year, essentially. So that to me is a huge topic. Like, what the hell's actually going on out there? We're using measuring sticks that are just completely wrong. And yeah, read into that what you win, what you will.
I dig it.
My second two, I guess they're combined, but really awesome to join Ben on BTC sessions while we bullish on the weekend. We just all have so much in common and so many like war stories to share, and it's epic. But one of my fears is the echo chamber. Like, we all feel this way, but like, what if we're wrong? And what does that mean? So point number 2 was like the fear about the echo chamber, and then my third question is like, what if we're wrong?
Okay, those are related, as you say.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, it's good to think that we might be wrong.
Well, that's
Sometimes
the
we,
point, isn't it?
yeah,
Our research should be a systematic process of looking for reasons as to why it's wrong. And absolutely everyone that's got halfway down this rabbit hole has never found anyone that's actually got a good reason. And that's what makes all
those
of
are
us
good.
so excited, but also, what if we're wrong? And that whole Nassim Taleb black swan type chit chat where it's like you think swans are white until suddenly one's black. It's like, well, I was fucking wrong.
There we go.
So, yeah.
That's good.
That'd be a
Oh,
good
I dig
topic.
it. Okay. I'll chuck mine across and then we can jump into whichever of them first, man. Okay, so the first one is like, I've been pondering about this particular topic and it's something we can go back and forth on, but I'm not interested in just talking to people who are already Bitcoiners. I'm interested in talking to people who aren't Bitcoiners yet. Maybe people who are, I don't want to say bit curious, because even that implies that you've got an open mind and you're receptive to something different. I'm talking about how do you connect with people who are just on the fiat treadmill, working their tits off, doing their best, stacking as many fiat units as possible to eventually buy a home, to eventually settle and retire. And I've come to this conclusion that it's so much of what we like, so much of understanding Bitcoin is about challenging your framework. And so it relates to the question of authority. So we as Bitcoiners go, this money is not valuable simply by virtue of you decreeing it. We think this is valuable because the market has driven that. We don't think that what you're telling us is in our best medical interests is in our best interests. We're going to do the work ourselves, etc. And it comes to the previous generation has, as well as later generations, they rely on authority when it comes to making arguments. I just watched like a little clip about some COVID stuff, like a little discussion on Channel 7. And the guy's first thing was, we've got 2 Nobel Prizes and we have some of the best immunologists in the world. It seems very subjective. I don't care about your fucking prizes, and I don't care if you call it quote unquote the best. Let's talk about reality and facts. And I think that's something that Bitcoiners do well, and it's something that I think is going to be important if you and I are going to try and break through the matrix and talk to people where they're at. Ordinary people, the 99%, not the Bitcoiners. So that's step 1. Let's talk about authority as a framework, and then how do we connect with people. The other thing was, and I was hoping maybe you and I could go toe to toe here, is Bitcoin isn't about saving. Bitcoin is about investing. And that's a discussion that I would like us to have.
Yep.
And you'll probably take the other position.
Very strong position the other way,
Oh.
so that's a good place to start.
Yeah, so that could be fun. And then the last one, I thought it touches on what we are going to be doing at Bitcoin Mentor Australia, but something that I think is becoming more and more apparent to me is when you're setting up your self-custody stack, it's all very well to get that in place. You can have stateless, trustless solutions, but it's not about you. It's about your the generation afterwards. It's about your legacy. And what's going to happen when you die? And how confident are you that you're going to be able to hand those over? That should be the driving factor, not how much can I rely as little as possible on a particular software or particular vendor. For me, those are incremental improvements, but the big picture is, hey, can you just get this corn across to your loved ones? And that should be the primary thing. So I thought maybe we could touch on some of the different trade-offs and solutions in the market and things that people can consider, because I've dabbled with quite a few different solutions and I keep changing and I kept on updating, but it became apparent to me not too long ago that my wife has zero interest in learning about it, and that's going to be the real problem. So it needs to be idiot proof. All right, so there we go. Those are my topics.
Well, perhaps the saving and investing topic is a good one in terms of also hunting for discussion where we're not just agreeing with each other the whole time, and the echo chamber, so to speak. So let's start there. I would be intrigued to know, why do you think Bitcoin is an investment, not saving?
Okay, so We often hear that because Bitcoin is money, that it's digital savings technology, and it's different to investing, which is about speculating. But when I think of saving, I think that just comes down to semantics potentially. And I think it's a nice heuristic for us to talk about in the Bitcoin world. But I think in reality, saving is about preserving purchasing power, not over 4 years, but over short periods, to me. And a silly analogy would be like if I'm saving my cake, I love cheesecake, and I'm saving my cheesecake, and I come back 2 days later after my birthday, after I've been a little piggy, and I want some more cheesecake. I'll be absolutely shocked. Yum yum yum. I'll be fuming. I'll be absolutely fuming if half the cheesecake that I had has now 20% less. And I'll go to my wife, have you been eating my fucking cheesecake? What's going on? And I was saving my cheesecake. And it's like, I don't want to store my money or my stored energy in something that is incredibly volatile over short periods. That's the caveat here, Jake. So it's like, is Bitcoin long-term savings? Yes, potentially. But is it short-term savings? No. Because I don't want to recommend to people to save their money in Bitcoin if they need it within 4 years, because anything can happen.
What's the best way? So I don't, it's strange, right? On some level, there's no such thing as wrong and right. And it comes down to a person's individual view of the world and how they see things and how they choose to steward capital is completely up to them. And that's okay. And they might see a different playing field to me, to you, to anyone. And therefore, what they decide to do, go for it. The way that I would think this through is from a kind of portfolio allocation perspective. What I didn't understand pre-Bitcoin is that it was possible to save. I thought that you had to invest in order to save. And the reason I thought that, and it's very, very common, is because the money that we inherited from a status quo perspective, whether that be pounds in my case, but here in Australia, Aussie dollars, euros, USD, whatever, wherever you are, the likelihood is, unless you were using gold off the bat, which basically no one does, you had a inflationary monetary policy driving a local government and central bank funded type scenario, in which case the money that you might have is eroding in purchasing power year over year. And so the only way to stop your purchasing power eroding is to invest. And the brilliant thing about Bitcoin is that it shines a light on that conceptually as being false. It is not true that to preserve purchasing power over time that you have to invest. You buy Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a sound money. And so when you start digging further down this rabbit hole, basically the guys in Vienna 150 years ago had it fucking bang on. And the Austrian School of Economics is like a truth serum on the world around you. It's just the most wonderful piece of academic and intellectual kind of inquiry I've ever been down that really has changed materially my day life. And so where I was wrong was that you didn't have to invest to save. And where I was also wrong is that when you invest, you are saving, but they're not the same thing. In that, to give an example, when I received an inheritance as a young man, I got pounds into a bank account. If I'd kept those pounds in the bank account for 10 years, I knew that at the end of that 10-year period, long-term saving in that currency, then the purchasing power would erode over time. So it's like, I can't do that. I have to invest. What do I invest into? Well, another question entirely. You go to a financial advisor of some form, or a wealth manager, as we call it in the UK, and they will then, for 1% a year, be the discretionary investment advisor for you, and you can buy public market goods, bonds, equities, currencies, commodities, whatever they decide is a good basket of assets to own. And then you could play around in the real estate space or whatever you might do. All of those things require you to take those pounds and make some kind of risk? Do you take on some kind of risk, whether you're buying a portion of a company, when you're buying some government debt, whatever the case might be, your money leaves your bank account and goes to someone else, and you have to hope that they give it back to you at some point. And there's a lot of trust involved. Now, the day that I realized that actually you didn't have to invest to preserve purchasing power over time, and there was such a thing as the most saleable good, and that money was a technology and a tool that had solved the double coincidence of wants problem for primitive trading societies, that was just a massive light bulb moment. It's like, okay, well, there is actually an option here where you can just save. And so having Bitcoin in self-custody over that example of 10-year period, you'll preserve your purchasing power, and it's not an investment. It's a savings tool. Does that make sense? And there's loads of stuff.
There's something else. There's something you said there that resonated. Not all of it, to be honest, but some of it really hit home. The main bit is when you've got a lump of fiat and you now need to allocate. Well, let's go back a step. Traditionally, you would take a portion of your income and save it, and then you would invest. So you might take $100, save 10 as cash, and then invest 90% if you like. And that was, the savings were for a rainy day, quote unquote. They need to be liquid. They need to preserve purchasing power over a short period. So that's where my savings reference comes in. Where what you say does resonate is Bitcoin, unlike bonds or stocks, there is no counterparty risk. And that makes it quite distinct. So with a company, there's execution risk, there's competition, there's no guarantee that your company is going to do incredibly well
tomorrow.
I was actually talking to a company today in Fiat Life. These dudes went public in 2007, and they are down 99.79% since 2007.
From that IPO price.
Yeah,
Fuck.
yeah. I think it's incredible. So by all accounts, it's not. Yeah, I mean, it's incredible.
Must have been a slog. Fucking hell.
Jesus Christ. I know. So that would be quite upsetting. Hey, imagine that's my wealth.
Suckers.
But like, okay, so from a company, that's the perspective.
They probably got a ton of money out.
Oh yeah, initially, exactly. So they're probably fine. And then you look at bonds, which you've got all manner of bonds. They call them junk, and then they've got investment grade. But fundamentally, it doesn't matter. They all have a degree of counterparty risk. We know the U.S. government's not going to default, but they're certainly going to erode the value of those dollars over time. So I think I can see where you're going with that, in the sense that Bitcoin is like a monetary good.
Another example is, if I was to think through a portfolio, if you had like 4 tranches of a portfolio, so think 4 columns, and you would have cash flow, growth, commodities, savings. So if you were to split your entire net wealth up into those 4 brackets, and traditionally that would be like you own BHP and you get some cash flow, you own Apple, or Apple's probably a bad example now, but Nvidia for your
I don't
growth.
think they pay dividends. Yeah,
you own some gold as a commodity play, and then you have your savings in whatever fiat you might have, right? So those are your 4 tranches or buckets that you might have your capital in. The crazy thing about Bitcoin is that it's arguably owning an equity that pays you a dividend of 4% and might go up in line with the index, is picking up pennies in front of a steamroller. In terms of growth, Bitcoin is just as effective. I mean, you're not necessarily outpacing something like Nvidia, but you've got to be a professional stock picker to find the outpacing investments that are actually out there. It's also a commodity, and it's also savings. So you could have let's say 80-20 portfolio, 80% Bitcoin, 20% Australian dollars, an all cash portfolio, and still get growth and outpace your cash flow plays. It's insane how it performs in comparison to all these other things that we've been using before. And then when you start to look at, okay, well, there's $900 trillion worth of stuff out there, current market cap roughly, of which Bitcoin is around $1 trillion. And you look at real estate and bonds and equities, it's like 600 trillion together. You're like, okay, well, maybe equities are probably better at keeping up from a growth perspective, but a bond is guaranteed to lose purchasing power over time. And real estate is actually not as effective in a lot of cases at preserving purchasing power over time. So I see those two buckets as like huge areas of monetary premium that will be siphoned into Bitcoin. So my point being is, as a capital allocator, I think of money as something very different to an investment. And money, when you study Austrian economics, gives you three features: store of value, medium of exchange, unit of account. And the younger me, the 20-year-old or 22-year-old, when I first received some money after dad died, had no idea that money could be store of value. Just no idea. You get these dickheads talking about, oh, money's a collective illusion. And they want you to think it's a collective illusion, but that's wrong. That is wrong. It is a tool, a product of the free market. We have tried and tested tons of different types of money over the last 5,000 years. And gold has, generally speaking, been the best thing we came across. But now Bitcoin is just better than gold. But no one realizes yet.
It is true.
So yes. So
let's go
basically,
back to
me,
the original point.
Bitcoin is not an investment. It is a savings tool, 100%, because it is money and it is not an investment.
Okay, in that light, let's imagine I'm living in Africa and I don't have a huge amount of disposable income and I don't have any assets. And let's just, for argument's sake, say I can save $100 a month. And my time horizon is uncertain because life is fraught with uncertainty, because I don't necessarily have a social security net and just a whole host of things. In those circumstances, I would say it's foolish to tell that person to put their money in Bitcoin. I would, dare I say, tell them to put their money, if they had a year or 2 year horizon and they lived in the likes of Malawi, just buy USDT. And it sounds crazy. It sounds absolutely crazy. But if you live in those types of economies where you're experiencing, I can't even remember what Malawi's inflation was, but like 30, 35, 40%, something like that. I might be wrong, but it's very high, double digits. That's going to be really useful to you. Yeah, maybe let's have a look at it. I mean, because I always think about it. So it's averaged 16.7% in the 10 years. 22 figure was 21%. And the current rate...
I'm looking at something that doesn't make sense, but... So the point that you're getting at here is that if we were to continue in the same vein in which the most saleable good, aka money, that is a store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account, technology, that the fiat currencies of the status quo, they don't fulfill the store of value function over a long period of time. But what they do is do that in the short term. So if you were buying USDT or USDC or whatever other fiat currency and whatever derivative you can get your hands on it for, maybe even just cash, then yes, I wouldn't suggest Bitcoin if you need the money within 3.5, 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's not a short-term savings vehicle in that sense.
No. And I've actually seen firsthand people that have tried to buy Bitcoin to get themselves out of a bit of a financial pickle, only to find themselves getting smacked in the face with a baseball bat during the bear and having to ride that puppy all the way down. And now they fortunately have ridden it up, but it hasn't ever hit the highs that they imagined. There was this sort of hope. And then in that sense, it became, what I told them was, highly speculative. You're not saving, you're just speculating and you're gambling because you don't understand it properly and you've put your whole net worth in this thing and you want it to 10x in 2 years. And that's not what this thing's built to do.
It's about not getting poor slowly.
Yeah.
But when you describe Bitcoin as an investment and not savings, what you're really saying is that Bitcoin is not a savings vehicle in the short term, and therefore you need to think of it as an investment because you don't want to touch it for 3 or 4 years. Okay. So my pushback to that basically being is they're actually, from a characteristics perspective, they're completely different things. i.e., money is very different to owning an asset such as an equity or a bond or a house or whatever else, a classic car. those are not necessarily saleable goods, right? They're completely different in terms of how they function, how you can own them. And you can't just turn up and be like, do you want to buy my Apple stock? That's probably one company that people would buy, but do you know what I mean? If you've bought like a random company, it's just not easy to sell them necessarily to a punter on the street for your coffee. Whereas I don't like that coffee example.
The punter. I love the punter. No, but I see your point. I mean, fundamentally, Bitcoin has characteristics that make it money. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I mean, that's the reality. I just think right now, in the nascent stage that it is, I call it an emergent store of value or a speculative store of value. It's not an established store of value, much like gold. And in that sense, it's necessarily volatile. And in that sense, you necessarily need to have a long-term time horizon. Right now, I reckon, fast forward a decade, I would imagine in a decade's time, you could store your surplus energy on a monthly basis into Bitcoin, and it ought to preserve for the most part, I'd imagine. I think volatility is going to flatten out big time once the majority have joined. We're not even in the early majority of that sort of technology adoption curve. So I think it's still very early days, but I always relate it to people sitting in Africa and having to ride the volatility. And I'm having a conversation with my man Oaken tomorrow.
Cool.
And,
shout out to Oaken.
Absolute legend. Such a good lad, eh? And I want to tackle that issue. But anyway, I think let's put a bow on this one. I think we agree in some respects, we disagree in others, but I think we agree to disagree, maybe, in some respects, yeah. It's an interesting topic. What else grabbed you?
Well, let's talk about the CPI in Australia, because this was just like, this grinds my fucking gears. To put some context in here, so I'm just reading this website. And again, this is very unique to me at least, but because I was in a situation where my father had died and he was wealthy, so I had some funds I had to figure out what to do with.
Sorry, can I ask you a question? I've never understood. So is it the case that you inherited a cash and not necessarily like a portfolio?
So what happened was, so Dad died, RIP Dad, on the 1st of January 2009, and his assets were transferred into a number of different trusts on his death. Those trusts were managed by trustees, and I was a beneficiary of those trusts. And in his will, it was very clear as to how the assets within those trusts were to be divvied up. Now, where things got a little complicated was that I was the eldest son, and the family home I was earmarked to inherit in a kind of old school English way, where the eldest son basically gets everything. And so after 18 months of his death, I had reached the very firm conclusion that I didn't want my mum to live in his tomb for the next 10 years. I was 20, right? She was only 48. For me to inherit the family home and keep the dynasty going, it was like, it went wrong, right? Dad was too stressed and he died of a heart attack, and it didn't make sense. So this place it's not right for me. It's not right for us for the future. So we sold, and it was mainly the proceeds from that house, which is the capital that I received. So I ended up with 20% of the value of the property that was sold, and I gave my brother and sister some money, and we kept some money to then buy my mum a place, and also provided with an income when Dad was gone. And yeah, we couldn't really afford to keep this place going, basically. So it was either we sell off bits of the farm and keep the whole show on the road, and I inherit it somehow, move in and like make the whole thing work, or we just pull the trigger and realize it's not right. So yeah, to be honest, there was plenty of things that were not easy at all. I was very young, and because the property had been in the family for a long time, there was a lot of people that were very upset that it got sold, and someone's brother had died or someone's uncle had died or whatever the case might be. And let's just say that it wasn't a very easy time. So as a 22-year-old, I got a bit of money into a bank account in the UK. And that was really the start of this whole investing journey. It's like, okay, what the fuck do I do now?
What does a young Jake do? All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to get that context, so I never actually fully understood, but that's cool. Okay, so tell me about this.
Let me continue to where I was going then, because that leads on nicely. So since the age of 22, I'm now 36. I have been in regular contact with the investment world. And what I used to have was, so I went up to London and I got a few connections that were like the friends of the family accountant or, my uncle or whatever. And I had 3 or 4 meetings in a day going and interviewing different wealth management companies. And the company that resonated most strongly with me was a business called Ruffer. And they basically had the tagline, which was like, we won't lose your money. I was like, great. Now, I've wanted to keep things really conservative. I very much doubt he listens or will ever listen to this, but shout out to a guy called Harry Sevier, who's a similar age to ourselves. He was fresh out of university. I was basically this very kind of irrelevant client for the company, and Harry ended up being my account manager for 8 years. And I learned a hell of a lot from him about how the investment world works. And we would have quarterly catch-ups on what was going on in financial markets. And yeah, there were times when he was just too much of a hardcore economist. I couldn't keep up with what was going on, but it was very, very good insight on the world of wealth management, how they steward capital over time. And long story short, the CPI is a metric that gets rolled out all day long by people in the kind of asset management industry. And every portfolio out there, generally speaking, is priced against the CPI. So everyone knows inflation is going on, but they use the CPI metric to show that they have managed to beat inflation. And yeah, long story short, I actually don't think they beat CPI. And it's not really in their interest to teach their clients about the intricacies of it, because they want to keep the 1%, and they get 1% regardless of performance. And so there's a misaligned incentive, basically, where the long-term capital growth position of a person's wealth with a business like that, it's in theory, it's possible to move your money. Oh, you could sell everything tomorrow and move to a different money manager. But it's actually very sticky. And that's really because it's still a relationship game. It's very, people value trust, and they value knowing the same people. Yeah. Anyway, so CPI, when I look at this, I'm like, hang on. So the Australian government and their Bureau of Statistics are clearly stating that the main metric which they measure inflation with is adjusted every 12 months from 2018. What the hell does that mean? That means that if you look at the CPI from 8 years ago, it's different to 7 years ago, different to 6 years ago in terms of how it's calculated. In the last 4 years, where Bitcoin has gone from being a really small allocation in my net wealth to now probably 65%, a bit less now, it's come off a bit, but about
you're
60%.
A pussy, Jake. You need to up that. No, I'm joking.
No, fair enough, mate.
I'm just
fair
giving
enough.
you shit. No,
fair enough. About 60% as an allocation today, and it's just this. It's like a truth serum. You just learn all these different things that are actually important. So the real question is, what's my purchasing power? Because relying on government data like the CPI is a waste of time. And also relying on the report that a wealth manager will put together every 12 months and might give you a nice lunch and say, look, here's how well you've done this year. And whatever the figure it is, they still got their 1%. Their buddies in the funds that get their funds still got their 0.5% or whatever their fund management fee is for the index tracker that they've bought, or whatever the hell they've deployed your capital into. And it's like the industry overcomplicates the whole thing so much to make it look like they're doing this really difficult thing. And actually, Bitcoin just beats all of them by gazillion miles in terms of counterparty risks, in terms of capital growth. And learning about that's incredibly empowering. And so, yeah, the CPI just grinds my gears beyond belief, because people use it to justify the erosion of purchasing power over time. Oh, but we beat the CPI. All right. What's the real inflation, mate? All right. You're sacked is actually how the conversation should go. And it doesn't. Crazily.
No. So let's think about that.
It's wild. They're just losing money every year.
Oh yeah. So let's think about that. Okay. I read a book. Well, I'm reading a book, and I listened to a pod recently that inspired me to jump on this book, Fiat Food. And as long as governments...
Not the Saifedean one.
No, well, Safe actually has written the forward.
Okay, I've seen that. I haven't read it myself. Okay.
It's so the way I do with Kindle books is I just buy the sample, because I've bought so many books and I just go, what was I thinking? I don't like this. I hate this person's writing style. But I've started this one and I'm really loving it, so I'll definitely buy it. And part of the pod, and this was with Preston Pish, it was basically like because government is in charge of the CPI, it has this ability and incentive to always make it appear less than it really is. That's just the overarching framework, right? So he talks about how in the 40s, Lyndon Johnson was up for election and the price of eggs, for whatever reason, was going absolutely haywire. And this was an issue. And so he got on the blower and worked with his friends in media, and they started publishing stuff about how bad eggs were for you. And lo and behold, demand dropped. And so the prices dropped. And so suddenly now eggs weren't that expensive after all. And so these are the kinds of things that governments are, not even if they do, but it's like they're incentivized to do it. If you have the ability to pull the strings, to change the measuring stick, as you say, why wouldn't you do it? Of course you'll do it. There's nothing more upsetting to people to go, by the way, you're getting poorer every year. Oh, sorry, that's the truth. No.
Vote for me.
Vote for me. So
No.
when they're doing these adjustments, what I would absolutely love to know is, have they ever made adjustments that result in an overall higher CPI? So if all the statisticians and the actuaries and all the smart asses sitting back in the back room there calculating this, going, do you think they sit there and go like, if we create this basket of goods and we give it this weight, it will result in a higher CPI. Let's run with that. No, they're always incentivized to make it less. They're always going to use tricks like hedonic adjustments. You suddenly now have got more things in your car. So your car's not as expensive as you think, Jake, because you've now got Bluetooth and a reverse parking camera. And they'll exclude things that are volatile, things like energy. What I would love to see is a real metric that says, and by the way, when they calculate this, I think I saw the number, whether it was 400 and something or 4,000 and something people. The sample is incredibly small. So I'm like, who are these people, right?
Yeah, that's when you start digging around a little more, isn't it? It's like,
I'd love to know.
We asked 40 people.
Exactly. I spoke to Jake. What's your rent like? No, so it doesn't make sense to me. I think, and this, I'm going to do a full episode on my show, the Why Bitcoin show. There's a different type of inflation. It's called, there's asset price inflation. And I think that's what we should care about, because it goes down to purchasing power. I'm not as interested in tracking the cost of living index. I'm more interested in tracking what can I buy more of. If I'm slaving away like a schmuck and I now think I've got a stunning salary, okay, but all the things that I wanted to buy today actually are twice as more expensive as they were 5 years ago, and now I've got like a 40%, 50% increase in my salary, and I think I'm an absolute genius. Guess what, bro? You went backwards. And I actually discovered that the other day. My actual package is materially better than my salary in 2019, but the cost of living was so much more affordable back then. So I'm actually worse off today with a much, much better package. And that's ultimately what I think is it. CPI is about gaslighting people, man. And
it's scary.
Yeah, and I don't know what it's going to take. Because I think that relates nicely to my point there, Jake. It comes down to trust and authority. Do you know what I mean? They're trying to tell the people and the public not to believe their own eyes. Because it's like, oh, the cost of living, it's really bad. It's really bad. Don't worry, inflation is really low. I think our inflation is... What is Australian CPI at the moment?
Oh, mate. They'll change it tomorrow.
Sounds quite cynical.
Guys. You just looked at the CPI yesterday, did you? Oh, well, today happens to be the day that we change the CPI.
It's 3.6%. Okay. That's the current one. Now,
yeah.
Obviously that doesn't... What they don't tell you, and this is another great sleight of hand, they don't talk about, there's no disinflation. There's nothing's getting cheaper, okay?
Yeah, no
everything just sticks forever. McDonald's are not suddenly going to say, all right, guys, we raised prices, but now the beef's a little cheaper. It's there forever. And that's what makes it like so pernicious, because people will go and look and they'll go, oh, actually, it's 3.6%. No, dude, it's 3.6% up from last year. And yes, it's slowing, but it's still going up. Inflation pisses me off, man. It really upsets me. And it's not necessarily the case that things should automatically become more expensive.
So two things come to my mind that I must mention. So the first is, it's true that money is, sorry, let me spit it out. It's not money that you want, it's what money buys you. Right? So very simple statement. So it doesn't, you could have fucking oodles and oodles and oodles of money. It doesn't matter. But what do you actually need, and can you buy stuff with it? Or what can you buy with it? So it's just literally a reflection of your purchasing power. And therefore the question is, what is my purchasing power? And so the consumer price index, taking a basket of things that consumer supposedly actually needs, and therefore having a reflective metric on what or how the price has fluctuated, it doesn't tell you how much or what you can buy for your money, really, especially when they start playing around with like what goes into the CPI calc, as it so clearly states. Like, we update it every year. Okay, so that means that this year, when you say that the inflation rate is 3 point whatever percent you just said, what does it mean if we use the calculation framework from the year before, or the year before that, or the year before that? Because you just changed it every year. And it's where it is actually very insidious. The whole thing, it's just this big merry-go-round of lies that conveniently kind of concealing this extraordinary theft that is going on. I mean, I used to listen to people talking about the fact, oh, taxation is theft. You're like, it's funny how conditioned one is, because you immediately go, oh, you can't say that. What do you mean? And I even had a friend recently who said to me, we're catching up with him, I'm completely happy with the taxes that I pay, completely happy. And he was making fun of another friend of mine who would, without any doubt, be running his affairs through a limited company, offshore in some way if possible, and keeping his tax bill as tight as possible. And it's like, wow, but I mean, we are the most heavily taxed people ever known to mankind, on your income, on your death, on your investments, on, you name it, right? There's all these different things. You think, what the hell's going on out there? And they use metrics like the CPI to then print money, which is a stealth tax. Whoa, this is just the craziest scenario ever. And we're kind of like, we're cool with it. I mean, in Australia, it goes as far as it's illegal not to vote. You get fined for not like continuing the charade. So they get to change the price of money at will. They get to change how they calculate the amount that the price of money is moving. And to top it off, you're forced to vote them back in. Or they'll just fine you some more. It's like, okay, does that make sense? What's going on here?
Do you know what? Do you know how these things happen? There's this sort of, like, when it comes to being somebody who likes to control people or whatnot, you don't just suddenly make a change. You don't suddenly impose something on someone. It's all gradual, small iterations over time. You might overreach initially. There's a bit of a blowback, but it's like negotiation. I don't tell you right away, hey, I'm prepared to pay this price. This is my price. I'm done. I push the boundaries a bit because I know where I need to land.
Real haggler, aren't you?
No. I'm a negotiator, not a haggler.
Oh, whatever.
Different species. Oh, geez, you need me, hey? Maybe.
I do.
Yeah, because
that kind of shit.
I do not.
Even though I was a broker for many years, which meant I essentially spent my whole day negotiating prices. But
I love it. So anyway, I think that's what happens with government, right? So I think that's what they do. They go, this is where we need to land.
Is it as pernicious as that in terms of the premeditated, calculated side of that? It's like, oh, don't change anything too much, otherwise they'll figure out like what's going on type thing.
Well, I'm going to uncover more about this whole fiat food thing, but when you start realizing, like, and I'll share that as I learn more about it, but you start questioning everything from the food industrial complex, like the fact that most people are just sick and fat and unhealthy and lethargic, and it's so because they're just metabolically unwell, and we're the most unwell we've ever been. And the type 2 diabetes is like rife, and then it's like this absolute mystery because certain health associations put like Cheerios as being more nutritionally healthy than beef, as an example.
Retarded, yeah.
There are vested interests in promoting certain agendas. It's the same people who have a vested interest in making it seem like the world is coming to an end. We're in a climate crisis, and it's used things to like change of language, crisis, not a climate change. That gets more urgency going.
Global warming.
There's an incentive because there's a shitload of money to be made by certain people, like green entrepreneurs, and they don't really care that sort of you need reliable baseload energy to actually have a flourishing society. They care about pushing their agenda, and so they'll push whatever message they have. So I think like the world is comprised of these powerful people who have their vested interests, and they find ways of manipulating narratives and stories. We need to go and save democracy. Therefore, we need to go to Ukraine. And it's like, we've got drug addicts lying in our streets, but we've got money to send to Ukraine. Meanwhile, the oligarchs in Ukraine are ballers. The son's driving a Ferrari, living the dream. They're loving it. They're absolutely loving it. And meanwhile, what they don't tell you is, and one senator actually had the balls to do it. He goes, yeah, I'm not going to do the American accent, but it's like, there are $12 billion worth of resources there. Because it's like one of the most, it's one of the richest.
But I am.
It's one of the richest. I mean, it's like, I think it's called the breadbasket of Europe. It's like incredibly mineral and resources rich. And that's what it's about. Same as Iraq. You know what I mean? Same story. So it's not about what it is. And it's the same about like inflation. I think they don't have an incentive to keep, to balance the books because they have agendas. It sounds like and I sound like conspiratorial, but it is just about a system of incentives, man, at the end of the day. And we are all fallible, and we would probably do the same if we were in their shoes, dare I say.
And I think we've got to the meat and potatoes of this podcast, which is that we should be investigating conspiracies. Absolutely. We should be talking about these things. What the hell is actually going on? Like this story with Julian Assange being released this week, and like when you start digging into what that guy actually did, and you're like, well, hang on, so he just told everyone about what something, I don't want to get this completely wrong, but to my understanding, as the founder of WikiLeaks, he was the person that was facilitating the release of classified US Army information that was basically clear evidence that they were killing civilians. And they didn't like that. So he's been in some kind of house arrest in an embassy in the UK for a fucking decade.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so sorry, who's the bad guy here? The guy who's holed up in an embassy somewhere who released a video of a helicopter gunship just mowing down civilians somewhere. Is he the bad guy? Or is it the person that funded the war and ordered those troops to behave in a heinous criminal way?
Well,
like
Tony Blair's got a Nobel Peace Prize. You know
does he
mean?
Actually? Shut up.
Yeah, no, I'm dead serious. And so does Obama.
I remember that guy.
These guys, bro. That's the thing. You need to step out of the matrix to start seeing the world for what it is. And Bitcoin is a truth serum, as you say. And it's like that
was a big one actually. That the idea of the money printer and endless war, and how an opt-in system like Bitcoin, which was meritocratic and decentralized and outside of the power of modern government, it's like a kind of life raft in that sense. But I had completely misunderstood the ability for additional money in the system to buy things before anyone else realized it had been printed. So the typical Cantillon effect, as we now call it, and how that funds what we now know of as the military industrial complex, and how dangerous that is. Like, what the fuck? So by choosing to use Australian, US dollars, euros, you are propping up that military industrial complex. And that's a big problem because of all of these wars that have happened in the last 100 or so years. How many innocent people have died as a result is just extraordinary. And like, here I am sitting in a nice part of Australia, having never been physically part of anything like that. And I'm sure I'm completely wrong about a number of different things, but it's fairly obvious that if you've got someone out there that can print their own money and give it to their buddies with a big gun, it's probably not the best idea. because the guy with
No,
the big gun then goes back to the guy with the money printer and says, "Give me more of that shit."
no, absolutely, man. I think it just comes down to incentives. I haven't finished it. I have this terrible habit of starting several books, and I worm my way through each one. It's a terrible habit. So I'm listening to Lynn Alden's audiobook of Broken Money because
Very, very
it's a
good.
monster. And frankly, I like Kindles. I like to read in the pitch black, and so it's too big. So I've been listening to that, and there's a discussion in there where she talks about basically how I think it was whether was it World War One or two, I can't recall which World War, but fundamentally they at that stage, I think it was World War One, because I think that that Britain was still on the gold standard, so they had to issue war bonds. So you had to persuade the public, like, hey guys, our life and our livelihood and everything we know and our culture is at risk.
If you don't do this, you're dead.
If we don't do this, we're dead. Yeah, and by the way, there was conscription and all that sort of shit. And it wasn't particularly well subscribed because people didn't support the war. And then they actually lied about it subsequently. Now, apparently, this is on who is the central bank in I think Bank of England.
Bank of England.
The Bank of England, yeah, it's on their
No,
website. Apparently,
it was. You're absolutely right. It was only released recently, but a top secret report was made public that John Maynard Keynes called it the. Oh, I'm going to forget the quote, which is going to really annoy me. But essentially, he joked about how much they managed to con the public. And you're right that the demand to fund the war was very low from the public, and instead of admitting the fact that no one wanted to go to war, they lied and printed a bunch of money, and they then inflated the value back on the society.
Crazy. It's a crazy thing, because it's a crazy thing to think, because if you're like going, part of what preserves a country's fiat currency's purchasing power is whether or not is the extent to which they are engaged in deficit spending and the amount of debt. So the more debt, the more deficit spending, the less trust, the less valuable your currency becomes over time. That's the theory, right? So then the idea is, well, if you need to persuade people that these wars are a good idea. And the way they've tried to sell, at least like Ukraine partially, is also to say, well, look, a lot of the kind of contracts and all those things are American contractors, right? So it's the same as Iraq. Like I
So
jumped
you don't mean it's the ex-actor walking around in the military kit that has sold the idea.
Actually, it's really like Clown World on another level, because I remember looking at. I was a youngster.
He's like a comedian or something, isn't he? Originally,
he was a comedian, literally, and yeah, Donald Trump called him a salesman.
Like, why is he always in military kit?
No, it's a shtick, man. It's a shtick. It's like, I'm at war, but I've got to hop on the cover of Time magazine. We've got to shoot in 5. Like, these are not serious people. No, I think our forefathers would have absolutely shat the bed if they looked at who these people were that were governing us.
People are also still dying, aren't they? Is that true? Oh, and this is when it gets really full on. She's like, well, what's real?
Oh,
because fucking
the media.
Channel 7 said it's going on, or Twitter says it's going on, doesn't mean it's actually real.
No, it's exactly right.
To my understanding, and I heard, I took the time to listen to Tucker Carlson on Joe Rogan because of like his it's a name that has appeared in my life in the last year or so since he got sacked from centralized media, Mr. Carlson. Just listening to this guy's story was fascinating, but like, he's worked in and around Washington his whole life, and as a reporter, it's your job to go and figure out what the fuck's actually going on. And there's a clip that came out recently that he'd posted of him in Australia. He must have been doing a talk in Canberra or something.
And yes.
It was. Have you seen this? Like 25
brilliant.
minutes of just classic shit. And the first one is when like this guy from the Sydney Morning Herald gets up and starts talking about how actually Tucker Carlson asked him if he got the COVID jab. He said, what's worse, the governments that have told everyone to get the COVID jab or entering Ukraine? Who's worse? Or who's worse? Putin, sorry, was the context. And the guy's like, actually, the COVID jab saved like millions of lives. And he literally just laughs his head off.
Yeah, he does his cackle.
Safe and effective. Fair play, mate. Because he's got this massive platform and is out there talking about these things and calling bullshit. That's actually fascinating. Why would you do that? Because it must be very, very risky. There's a lot of people that don't want you out there saying those things.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I
anyway,
love
he was
that.
talking a lot about Ukraine, and basically there are people obviously dying there, which is fucking horrendous.
It's absolutely crazy. From what I understand,
them.
there's absolutely, contrary to the narrative, from what I understand, the chances of them actually succeeding long term are very low, and they reduced the age of conscription. They're just trying to get more and more people in there. But to be honest with you, I don't follow it very closely because it's the current thing. It was really quite funny when I was in New Zealand. I felt like a lot of New Zealanders have been cucked. I say this with respect, but since this is unfiltered, like, it feels like a very cucked place. I mean, they had Jacinda Ardern as a leader, which I couldn't believe. I can't actually believe someone would actually listen to that person and go, yeah, I'll listen to you. I'll trust you.
One of the WEF's young rising starlets.
Oh, absolutely, hey? And she rode off into the sunset. But I was driving along regional New Zealand and
bumped into her.
I had a chat. I said, "Hey, you toothy son of a..."
Cindy, come here.
Yeah,
no,
I
got a bone to pick with you.
Come here. And I saw her teeth coming a mile away. But honestly, I saw all these sort of Ukraine flags and Palestinian flags and stuff, and I'm like, what the fuck are you trying to achieve here, guys? Why don't you go and do something good? Maybe I'm just one of these simpletons who's kind of like, if you care about something and you got a cause, just do it. Just be good. Like, when we were talking about earlier about money, it's not just about, you don't want numbers in a bank account, but you want to do something. I want to do some incredible shit in the world, but I'm going to be one of the last people to actually walk around publicizing it and rent a bus and go, Dale donated $7 million to the Dog Foundation.
Do it in the American accent again.
Oh, yeah, I'll try. But do you know what I'm saying? I find like virtue signaling it's the most cheap. It's so cheap. It's costless and it achieves nothing. That frustrates me. I want people to actually put some skin in the game and do something good. If you really care about Ukraine, then go and do something about it. Don't just fly a fucking flag outside your house in New Zealand of all places. What's going on here? Are you Ukrainian?
Isn't the scarier thing more that it's like I mean, to simplify things, it's like the playground, and there are some, I don't want to call them good guys and bad guys, but there are like strong and weak, and by attaching yourself to the seemingly popular vibe of the day is it's like a protective strategy in some ways. So,
yes.
I agree. I agree with that. I agree. Protect me. It's like,
it's
okay,
totally
so
true.
What you're trying to actually say is that you're not willing to think for yourself, and you're not willing to step out of the boundaries of what's considered to be the status quo or politically correct. Heaven forbid you break that, because you're not strong enough to stand on your own 2 feet.
100%. That's basically what it represents.
And
it's basically what it represents, man.
Where does broken money, to quote Lynn's title of her book, doesn't it inflame that problem?
Well, I think it goes back to something deeper, because as a species, we would not survive unless we cooperated with other human beings. So we are by default hardwired to want to cooperate, and we want to work together.
I love this kind of behavioral economic stuff.
It's like it makes sense.
If you try to survive in the wild on your own, you'd be fucked pretty quick.
And even if you survived, but you'd struggle.
If you piss the tribe off and they kick you out, then
you got to work with people, right?
Yeah.
So and there was some exactly. So there was a guy, Neil Oliver, this British fellow who was very vocal during COVID about everything, and he was on, whose show was he on?
Oh, he's the guy that said that if you don't get vaccinated, you should, not get into hospital or something.
Oh gosh, no, not him. No, fuck no. He's a good guy. He's a Scottish guy, a Scottish lad. So anyway, Neil Oliver, he was on this pod that I was listening to the other day, and he said, like, in the beginning, he's a journalist, and he had to fly to wherever it was, London or wherever, every week, and he'd hop on Ryanair. And he had the same experience. And he goes, even though I don't care what people think, even though I'm a strong individual, it was the hardest thing ever. First, I'd be lining up. And then as I arrive on the plane, they'd be like, "Sir, do you have an exemption?" And he goes, "In my mind, I'm a free human being. So fuck yeah, I'm exempt." So he walks on without a mask. And then he walks through, and then he goes through and he sees I'm in this in this metal tube with 250 strangers, every single one of them wearing a mask, and I'm the only one. And the eyes that are darting at me, that if they could, that there's that I could almost feel like there was this possibility that they could literally collectively grab me, wrestle me, and rip my face off because they hated me so much. And then I'd sit next to someone, and then she would get up and she would make a scene and ask to move. And he did that week in and week out during the whole thing. And he goes, that wears on you. And that's a strong, that I'm like a strong person too, but that's ballsy. So most people are pussies and they just want to comply and they don't want to stand out and be like, stick their head above the parapet. I don't blame them, but
It is hard.
It's hard, man.
I'm not sure how many times that guy did that, but in January and February of 2021, I commuted from Melbourne to Sydney quite a few times. I had a startup company with my wife that, to be honest, that was the beginning of the end. We failed as a business. It was a horrible experience I had going through an accelerator program in Sydney. That's another story, though, because at the time, there was all of these ridiculous lockdown laws in Australia and social distancing and masks. And I mean, all this stuff has just recently, come out in mainstream media. Fauci's like, it's just not true. It's insane, right? Talk about a collective illusion. Like, what the hell just happened? But and this is mainly my wife, to be fair, she's an absolute warrior in this kind of area. It's if a police officer came up to you in the state of Victoria and asked you why you weren't wearing a mask, you could say to them, quite within the law, I have an exemption, thank you very much. And they could not actually ask you for physical proof of that. It was a document between you and your health practitioner, and you could have any number of different things, whether that be breathing issues or anxiety or whatever. So we went to a bunch of protests over the course of probably 2 years, must have gone to like 10 or 12. We saw people get shot with rubber bullets. We saw people get beaten with batons by riot police in central Melbourne. We got shouted at by a police officer for having our young daughter with us at the time. You lot of fucking terrible fucking parents. What the fuck are you doing here? Like, it was crazy, right? And anyway, I would get on this plane, Virgin Australia, and it's so funny in hindsight. Everyone's in fucking masks, right? You must wear a mask before you get on the plane. You must wear a mask. And then you walk up to the fucking thing. So, are you wearing a mask today? No, I have an exemption. There's like a big pile of masks right next to the door. And they're like, okay, please come this way. And so I get on the plane and you're sat there, right? There was two different types of character to talk about the eyeballs. And I might have to listen to the episode of Neil Oliver talking about it. But one person, these guys were the hardest. They were fucking pissed off. They looked at you. What is this guy doing on the fucking plane? You're a risk. You're a risk to yourself. They were angry.
Yeah.
And the others are like cruising around with the mask underneath their nose. They look at you, they're like, fuck's sake, this guy's got it on the right vibe. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like the mask get a bit lower down. So exactly. I probably did that flight 6 times in total. No, it must be more than that. Yeah, 8 times maybe. And no, that's too much. Oh, whatever. Doesn't matter. The point is I was sat on a steel tube flying through the air with people wearing fucking masks all around me, having been specifically told that you had to wear one, and you just said, no, I have an exemption, and you're allowed on anyway. And it was a bizarre experience because you are automatically not part of the gang. You're the only person not doing it. And the first time was the hardest. But as you got more used to it, it was like, I'm just there. And they're also miserable, right? What's this fucking thing going to do? Like, it just didn't, none of it made any sense.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
I mean,
those are the days.
Rant even more, though, Dale. I mean, it was just, at one point, I remember, I had one morning, I almost wrote about this and I didn't, and I regret it so much in hindsight because it would have been such a good snapshot. But I would wake up in the morning, I would try and walk the dog and get out of the house for a bit because we were all in this fucking crazy house arrest essentially, and then I'd be eyeballed by all these people wearing masks walking their goddamn dogs in the park, right? So they'd be pissed off with you, and then you try and go and get a coffee, and there'd be big signs up everywhere saying you cannot enter the premises unless you've got a vaccine certificate, or you can't sit at the table unless you've got a vaccine certificate. And then you pick up your phone to make a phone call, and Telstra the fucking mobile provider has got Let's Vax in the top corner, and then you turn the TV on and the AFL's been played, and the beer companies are talking about get the jab or enjoy your shot, or and it was just insane, right?
No,
You
you
turn on in the
couldn't believe
car and
this.
the radio comes on. It's like, don't forget to go and get your vaccination, sponsored by the Victorian Government of Australia. Yeah, everywhere. And it was like, this is the biggest advertising campaign I've ever seen in my life.
No, it's
Safe and effective. Safe and
phenomenal.
effective.
Oh my god. No, no. And now Victorians are paying a COVID levy. Now, I remember in South Africa, man, those guys can't do anything right, but there was some poor sod surfing by himself, lonely, on the beach. And the cops went and literally arrested him and wrestled him down. And it's just like, what? So it's like, you guys can't keep crime under control, but you're arresting people in guys just surfing. The funny thing it was about the lockdown in South Africa, they made booze illegal and like cigarettes like illegal. So you couldn't. There were like limits to when and how you could buy, and so there were these rich, like you can imagine, like these fellas who've got like these massive cellar collections in fancy parts of Cape Town that were literally selling at 500,000% markups to retail because people were desperate for booze because they couldn't get booze. And what they actually found was it actually reduced violence dramatically in South Africa, like dramatically. And as a result, there were people who emerged from the whole thing that said actually it was a good thing that people got locked down and they were prevented from drinking and smoking, which is ironic because it's like, well, if you're not free, then what the fuck do you have? But in tying a bow on this conversation, in sort of drawing this inaugural episode to a close, I think the main thing I see in all of these themes is something I mentioned in my second point, which was it comes down to a framework and it's about how you see the world. And if you're somebody who's inclined to follow the letter of the law and not question things and effectively defer your judgment to authority, you're probably going to have a hard time seeing Bitcoin because officially they're not going to tell you it's worth anything. They're not going to say this is great. It's the same as the financial advisors. They're not going to go, you need to get some corn because it basically just obliterates my existence.
You don't need to pay them 1% for the next 10 years to manage your long-term savings account when you can buy Bitcoin, store it yourself, and beat all of their results anyway.
Exactly. So I think that's what that's the key takeaway here. But yeah, man, this has been good.
Lockdown experience I just have. So the Aussie Open of 2022, maybe something like that. I was invited by a customer I was working in the shipbroking industry at the time, to go and watch the tennis. So you turn up at the, Rod Laver Arena, and there's just this thing. Please stand in the queue, respective of, and you must show your vaccine certificate to enter the ground, on these tannoy systems. It was like going into some kind of strange science fiction movie. And so I go up with my ticket, and I'm like, well, I have an exemption. I think by that stage I'd managed to get a contraindication certificate from a friendly doctor in Queensland who subsequently got shut down by the regulator. Surprise, surprise, for giving these things out. But I was ushered across to another stand where I said I have an exemption for my mask, and here's my vax cert exemption thing. And they were like, cool, you just got to wear this wristband to show that you don't have to wear a mask. So I walk into the grounds, and there's like everyone's walking around with masks on, right? Coming to watch the tennis. Hyper social event, yet still there with masks on. Just none of this makes sense. And then I see my client, and he's like, how come you haven't got a mask on? I was like, I have an exemption, got this thing. And he's like, oh, okay, fuck. And then these other two clients rock up, and we sit in these 4 seats right next to each other in one of the main tennis courts, watch some of the tennis. My main client, I see his mask coming down. He's clearly not interested in wearing it, but like this, it's kind of the status quo was such that you should wear it. And then suddenly some fucking masked policeman turns up and tells some kid to put their mask up the row below, and everyone's like, "Oh god!" And up the mask goes. Anyway, we then had lunch pre-booked in this room, and it was when that whole Djokovic saga happened. And obviously Djokovic comes up at lunch, and these guys are talking about how, like, yeah, he should never be allowed to play. And I'm just sat there going, okay, probably not going to mention the fact that I haven't yet been vaccinated. And also, obviously, I have an exemption. I'm still not wearing a mask. Anyway, this whole day culminated in what is a social norm, which is at the end of the day, we said goodbye. And one of the guests was female. And so it was the guy who was the company lawyer of a shipping company, and she was the family member of the shipping business. He must have known her for years already. And at the end of the day, he shook her hand, and with 2 masks on, they kissed cheeks and then said goodbye. And you're just like,
what did I just look at?
What the fuck just happened?
No.
And to like, so everyone's trying to play by the rules, but they're not willing to say that the rules don't make sense. But then there's one like other social rule that's even more important, which is to be polite and say goodbye properly, that overrode everything else. Okay, so in this whole process, like you spoke about at the very start, like how do we speak to the 99%? I don't know if an hour and a half long rant with the two of us is gonna do that. I don't know. We'll have to see where this podcast goes. But is it the person that goes for the kiss at the end, or is it the person that doesn't wear the mask on the way in? Right? I don't know. Like, how do you?
I think it's the guy who has the mask on his chin, who knows it's bullshit, but it's
exactly,
just keeping.
Right.
It's just
so
keeping.
How do we speak to?
Yeah.
How do we speak to the 99% that are the guy that wears their mask around the nose on the plane to Sydney or in the Aussie tennis stadium? That's who we need to get after, because they're already going like, this doesn't fucking make sense, but I'll just do it because it's easier.
Yeah.
Oh, good times. Well, yeah, we'll
Good
have
times.
to come up with a proper title and all the rest of it. But for anyone that's made it to the end of the episode, this is going to be a weekly thing. Maybe we could have an audience Q&A. We could have some questions sent in. That would be very spicy for us, wouldn't it?
I would love it.
as media hosts.
I would love it. No, I absolutely love it. And we're going to evolve. We're going to evolve, no doubt. And I'd love to get people's feedback and what they like, what they don't like. And we can't please everyone, to your point earlier, but I think at the end of the day, the main thing that we want to do is just provide a platform for us to have just straightforward, honest conversations, and we can't pretend we know everything. I mean, I might pretend like I'm a genius, but I've been wrong about a lot in my life, so I'm happy to.
And that's a good thing. Being wrong's good because you learn.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
And that's okay.
On that note, Dale.
Let's do it. All right.
Click the stop record button. Thank you guys for having a listen.
Nice one.